And all you have to do is stand up, and there is support under you. And you don't have to do anything else other than stand up. Just like these skiers, they just stand up and just everything else is taken care of them. All they have to do is do their training. I'm sure there's a lot of training involved in all the things, but they don't have to push themselves. They don't have to make it happen. They just have to do their bit, which is to stand up. If they sit up there on the bench, panicking and going, I can't do it, and I'm sure that probably happens as well, then they'll never start. They'll never start down the ramp. Hello friends, John Dalton here, Further Emergence podcast, where we talk about love, life, consciousness, and the mystery. And in this episode, we're going into
trying to control love, trusting life, people pleasing, shadow integration, and walking each other home.
So this is the bridge I walk across to get into town here in Innsbruck. And as you can see, it's got all these locks on it, which is very common, very popular on bridges these days. And it sort of struck me as very symbolic, because I don't know if you know the story or where it all came from, but it's a sort of, it comes from a Serbian couple about 100 years ago who fell in love. They were going to get married, and then war came and he had to go and fight in the war. And when he was in the war, he after the war was ended, he was still stationed far away, fell in love with somebody else, and cancelled the whole engagement. And the woman was so upset and, never found another person and died of a broken heart, as people used to do back then. And the bridge that they used to meet on, people started to put locks on it as a sort of a, tribute to them. And I think it's like very symbolic of the way we think about love, because of all the things we could put to put a lock on it, and of all the places we could put it on is on a bridge, because a bridge is obviously over a river. This particular bridge is over the Inn River, this huge river that flows through Innsbruck. That's where it gets the name. This is the River Inn, and Bruck is German for bridge, or Brücken. That's probably the three of the German words I know. So I kind of think that love is like the river, it just flows. It just keeps flowing. It just does its thing. And we try to put that in, hold it, lock it in place with this, I mean, these locks are symbolic, but like that's what we kind of do, don't we? We kind of go, now, I love you and you're going to love me forever. And that's never going to change. And just in case, let me put a lock on that, I mean, Beyonce would say put a ring on it, but I think what this thing is about is like let's put a lock on that, which is like trying to put a lock on the whole river. Really, you can't do it. Like it's a wild thing. It just flows. It just does its thing, and you can't tame it. What you can do is you can acknowledge the wildness of it, and you can. It's like when you watch a movie and the hero says, "I'll protect you," or "I won't let that happen." I always end up kind of shouting at the TV when that's like, you can't say stuff like that, because you don't know about life. You don't know what's going to happen. You can't make future predictions. You don't know what kind of thing you're going to do. You don't know what kind of person you're going to be. What's going to happen? You can't predict that kind of thing. It's crazy. You can kind of go, "I want to protect you." I don't want that thing to happen to you. I'll do everything I can. I might die trying to do that. But to sort of say categorically, no, I'm definitely not going to, I'm definitely going to make sure I never fall out of love with you, or I'm going to protect you. I'm definitely, you can't say that sort of stuff, because you just don't know. You just don't know what's going to happen. And we kind of do that with love. We kind of go, this is great, this is great. Everything will pass, this too will pass. Shut up. I don't want to hear about that. Don't remind me that, this is a good thing. I spent my whole life searching for this one person, And the thing is, like, when you can acknowledge that things could change, that it's great for now, if you could just say that, like, it's great for now, and then all the locks disappear, and then the river flows more freely. The energetic river of love flows more freely. And you can honestly say, my God, I love you so much. I've never loved anybody like I love you. It's amazing. It's fantastic. And yeah, things might change. It's not very romantic. Don't write that on your Valentine cards. But that's the truth, isn't it? And when you kind of allow that in, then the river of love can just do its thing. Because the thing is, the river's going to do its thing anyway. These logs make no difference to the river. They're just a little human idea of trying to hang on to something, which, it's not going to work. It never works. So I think, just because I've been walking back and forth on this river, it's just every time I'm like, oh, funny little humans. We just try and do things in the face of the blatantly obvious, like we don't think we're ever going to die. We live as if we don't think we're going to ever die. We put locks on bridges, trying to contain and hold a love that is uncontainable, because love and consciousness are the same thing, and it moves. It's got vitality. It's got passion. It's going to do its thing. So this is ridiculous. And we're a bit ridiculous, and that's what's lovely about us. So I encourage you to throw away the locks and let love be free. And don't say things that you can't back up, like I love you forever, I mean, even if it's just to yourself, because the other person might not be on the same wavelength as you, and you sort of go, oh, I'm going to revise that I'm going to love you forever thing. I was listening to this podcast. I don't mean that, but just to yourself, to kind of, because we give ourselves such a hard time when we don't, when things fall apart, when the marriage doesn't work out, when the love changes, moves on the way the crazy love does, we kind of go, oh, I failed, and it's like, you didn't fail. It's just love. You were such a gift that it lasted as long as it did, because the river flows, So let it go. Ooh, right on cue. So I'm standing in front of Bergsøe ski jump. This is an Olympic size ski jump. And there's two things about it that really stand out. First, doesn't seem related. And it's this, there's a story about a 3-year-old child. They're in the water and they let go of the railing and they don't know how to swim, and they start to splash around and go, call for their parents and go, oh, I'm drowning, I'm drowning. And they don't realize that they're in like 2 foot of water, very shallow. And their parents just say to them, stand up. And they're like splashing, splashing, and then they got to put their feet down like, oh, okay. And they realize the water is just up to their waist. There's something very deeply kind of spiritual about that. Like, if you have a knowing about something and it seems overwhelming, it's like comes up from very deep in you to go and do a thing or to say a thing or to create a thing or change a thing in your life, and it can be very like that kid of like, I don't know what to do, I don't know what to do. And all you have to do is stand up, and there's support for you, there's support under you. The other half of that is why I'm at the ski jump, because when the people are doing the ski jump, they go from way up there, okay? And it is, I mean, from here, it's terrifying to think of like coming down that on skis, because it's not continuous. There's a part where they shoot off. This green thing area is the landing area. So it's closed today. I couldn't get up to actually show you how terrifying it is, but it is really terrifying. But the point is, when they're up there, it's not like other ski races where they get the go-ahead, and then they start using their poles like crazy. You know, it's not like downhill or slalom or anything like that. They're not going crazy pushing to get out of the gate as fast as possible. These people, they have these big long skis on. They don't have any poles, and it's extremely steep. I don't know if you can see it from here, how steep it is where they start off on. So what they do is there's a little kind of bench, and they sort of shuffle out onto the bench with the skis, and they're just sitting there. And when they get the go-ahead, all they do is, yes, you've guessed it, stand up. That's all they do. And gravity takes care of the rest. And it's the same in the spiritual life, in my experience anyway. When you're flailing around going, I don't know what to do, it's such a big thing, how am I going to do it? I don't know I can't see how it's going to work out. And your little mind, your little frontal awareness cannot grasp the scope of this impetus that's come from a deeper part of you and saying, we must do this thing. We must do this jump. And it can feel like that. Like it can feel like you're on the precipice and you're looking down and you're like, I don't know if I can do this. And the panic and the fear comes. And it's that thing of, and what I hope you remember is just this friendly parental voice going, stand up. And all you have to do is stand up, and there is support under you. And you don't have to do anything else other than stand up. Just like these skiers, they just stand up and just everything else is taken care of them. All they have to do is do their training. I'm sure there's a lot of training involved in all the things, but they don't have to push themselves. They don't have to make it happen. They just have to do their bit, which is to stand up. If they sit up there on the bench, panicking and going, I can't do it, and I'm sure that probably happens as well, then they'll never start. They'll never start down the ramp. But all they have to do to maybe win a gold medal, because as I said, this was an Olympic thing, not that medals matter or anything like that, but you know what I mean. All they have to do is stand up. And all you have to do and I have to do is stand up. And that sounds easy, but it's not. It's very difficult to stand up. But all you have to do is do that, and everything else is taken care of, and there's support. There's great support for you.
Now let's have a look at some of the memes in the Further Emergence Instagram feed. First one is, in order to break the people-pleasing pattern, we must learn how to sit with discomfort instead of reacting to it, including the discomfort of others being unhappy with us, the discomfort of letting others find the solutions to their own problems, the discomfort of having difficult conversations and setting tough boundaries, and the discomfort of realizing others' happiness isn't our responsibility, but our own happiness is.
This is a great one. And first thing that immediately springs to mind is when I was teaching people craniosacral therapy in Australia, and I'd set up the Australian Institute of Craniosacral Therapy, and I'd got an accreditation consultant to come in and help me, get the course accredited as a diploma. And this person, as well as knowing that accreditation procedure in great detail, they'd also spent a long time in teaching and the mechanics of teaching. And in the course of going through the process, I was saying to him, there's this part that they just don't seem to get, the students just don't seem to get. He said, well, tell me how it goes. And I explained how the teaching process went as I was doing it at the time. And he said, you're not letting them learn. And I said, what? I am the teacher, of course I'm letting them learn, He said, no, you're not, you're getting in the way. I said, what do you mean? He said, well, if you were teaching them mathematics and you wanted to teach them 2 and 2 is 4, what you're doing is going, what is 2 and 2? And then when nobody answers, you go, the answer is 4. And he said, nobody learns when you do that. He said, and you're doing that because you don't like the uncomfortable feeling of them not knowing the answer. And he was so right. Now, the things I was teaching were a lot more complicated than, what's 2 and 2. But I can remember the first time I did it, how uncomfortable it was. You know, I sort of asked a question, and nobody knew the answer. Everybody was like, there was this very uncomfortable energy in the class, and there was almost a palpable feeling of, just tell us the answer. And I wanted to tell them the answer. I wanted to, let me just tell you, let me just put everybody out of their misery and tell them the answer. But I really respected this man, so I didn't. I just stayed with it and stayed with it. And eventually, I mean, when I say eventually, it's not like it took 4 weeks. It took 5 minutes, but 5 very uncomfortable minutes. They got it. And I could tell that in them getting it, they learned, and they would not forget it because they had arrived at it themselves. And it was a real lesson for me I thought I was being helpful. I thought I was being a great teacher. You know, I was like, well, what's 2 and 2? Nobody knows. It's 4. And thinking, oh, great, now I've just imparted a bit of knowledge, without realizing that's not how it works. And having to sit with that awful feeling while they struggled. And we have, it's kind of, that's one of the things this thing is saying, is like people pleasing is doing that. It's not waiting for people to get it themselves, which is so difficult, to sit with somebody and let them struggle through it until they get it for themselves. It's so hard. And then the other great thing in this is about this idea of it's not your response. Other people's happiness is not your responsibility, but yours is. That's so hard if you've got this people-pleasing thing. It's so hard to get that, and to kind of, it can be so disturbing. We can be so, particularly if you had difficult parenting and your attachment issues are strained, like me, then if someone's not happy that I care about, I immediately go into the sort of fear response of a child, and like I have to try and make mummy happy, or I have to try and make daddy happy because it's kind of important. I'll die if I don't. And to kind of go, it's not up to me. It's not up to me to make them happy, but it's up to me to take care of my own happiness. That's a very revolutionary thought if you're not used to it. If you've had difficult parenting, that can seem like double Dutch. It's like, what? Whose happiness? No, I have to make sure they're happy so I don't die. And it's like, no, if they're not happy, you're not going to die. All you can be responsible for is the difficulty that you feel. But like anything, it requires practice, which sounds very strange. It's like I have to practice putting my own happiness first. It's like, yeah, because if you have the reaction to try and make other people happy, or that other people's happiness is your responsibility, and like I'm saying responsibility, but what it always feels to me like is I don't think about, oh, I'm responsible. It's like I have to make sure they're not unhappy because it's, crucial to my survival. If you've got that, then it's a learned response. So you have to unlearn it, which is not easy because it means you have to sit with the discomfort and handle it as best you can, and kind of go, okay, this discomfort is making me disturbed, so what do I do to sort of alleviate it? And of course the immediate response is, make them happy, get them to be happy, then I won't feel like this. And it's like, no, let's find another way, let's be creative, let's find another way to feel okay and not feel disturbed, even though they're still unhappy. Not easy, but well worth it, well worth doing. A real life skill.
The next one I wrote, and it was in response to this picture of this very cute looking demon. And it says, sit down with your shadow today and you'll thank yourself tomorrow.
Have you ever noticed, if you are listening to someone who's had an experience, a shared experience, and maybe some years have passed and they're telling the story of the experience and it's different, and you're like, I don't remember it that way, but you don't say anything. And you notice that the person, the way they're telling the story, they look pretty good in that story. That's what we all do. We all do that because we all have this idea of ourselves that we're very careful about, and we don't want anything to disturb that. And the idea of ourselves, in many ways, we look good. We're the hero. And this is in a sort of special compartment of ourselves because there's another part of us thinks we're terrible, but we'll put that to one side. Because in this idea of shadow work, what you're up against is this idea of yourself. Like, I think I'm a lovely person. I'm sure you do as well. So I don't like to think or even allow the possibility in that I'm mean or vindictive or cruel or that I'm power hungry or that I'm envious or all these other things. I don't like that. I don't like to think that about myself. And in a way, I spent a lot of energy kind of reining that in and making sure, it doesn't become apparent. And that's what shadow work is about being gentle enough to kind of allow yourself to feel what's there. If you don't have it, great. But most of us do. Most of us have deep, dark urges that make us feel very uncomfortable because it challenges this idea that we have about ourselves. And the feeling is, if I let that stuff out, if I even let myself acknowledge it, it's going to take over. And it's going to be like Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, and I'm going to turn into Mr. Hyde, and I'm just going to be an absolute nightmare. But the sad thing is that the more we try and ignore and suppress that part of us, it builds in strength and power, and it starts coming out the sides in weird and very disruptive kind of ways. Because when we can be comfortable enough with ourselves to kind of go, yeah, I can see that I do have very dark tendencies inside me. I don't act on them. I don't do anything about them. I don't lash out at people. I don't consciously manipulate people. I don't, give expression to them. But they're in there. Just being able to say, yeah, but they're in there. Suddenly, then you've got so much more energy because you're not trying to. No, I'm not that. Oh no, oh God, oh no, I'm not like that at all. And that's when you get into this idea of, because you hear people talk about shadow work integration, and it's the integration bit. It's like you're allowing all the bits of you on the inside to exist, to have their place, you're welcoming them. You're going, I see you. Yeah, I've got it. I've got that in me. I've got that jealousy in me. I've got that hatred in me. I've got that, intense anger in me. I've got all this different stuff in me. Yeah, I've got it all. Yeah, it's there. Suddenly you can relax. You can just, somehow there's a weight is lifted off you because the burden that you've been carrying is the denial. It is the kind of going, no, I'm not that thing. Because there's this fear that it's going to take over, that you're going to run wild. You're going to have 50 affairs. You're going to rob a bank. You're going to beat somebody up. You're going to lash out at somebody who you've wanted to lash out at for years. You're going to do all this crazy stuff, and you don't. So when you let it go, and you kind of go, yeah, I've got that in me, then the integration happens. And then all the parts of you come together in this beautiful lightness. You get this lightness that can happen because you're not denying that you've got darkness in you. And we all have it. We've all got it. We've all got both in us. And it doesn't mean you're going to turn into a terrible person. But weirdly, through acknowledging it and through relaxing into it, it doesn't run you as much, which is a kind of contradiction. You kind of think it would, but the fact that you try and suppress it, it actually makes it go undercover, and you end up doing things subconsciously when you are denying it. And it also gives you access to very powerful stuff, because you could kind of think, oh, I hate my life. It's really terrible. Have terrible things are happening. I don't know. Oh, it's awful. When you allow your shadow work, you also allow the possibility that there's a part of you, a possibly what would be described as perverse part of you, that's actually enjoying the misery, that's actually enjoying the suffering. And you go, that's ridiculous. How could there's no way I could be enjoying this. You just have to look at people and horror movies, right? Like, if it was a weird thing, like an unusual thing, like an anomaly, horror movies would not have got going. Horror stories wouldn't have got going. Okay? But there's a part of people that likes to be frightened. They like the ghost story, the kids around the campfire with the torch under the face, telling the ghost stories. And there's like a thrill to being scared, and then you just expand that for more to include movies. And it's like, oh, that's why people go to scary movies. They like getting afraid. And then you kind of go, well, we're playful creatures. Inside, we kind of know we're living in a dream, somewhere very deeply. And some part of us kind of, if you can acknowledge this part of you that's kind of like enjoying your miserable life, that's enjoying the terrible things that are happening to you. Now you might go, that's ridiculous. But it's part of this shadow thing of just allowing yourself to touch base with it and go, yeah, I can feel that. I can feel the part of me that's actually enjoying this. That releases a huge amount of power, because you are including, you're being kind, you're being compassionate to that part of you, and you're acknowledging, you're going, yeah, there's a part of me actually enjoys this. And then in a weird kind of way, you can connect to the enjoyment. And it's in connecting with the enjoyment that you release the power, and you have a much better chance of changing it. When you're in denial of it, it just keeps going. And it's like, well, I don't care. I hear everything you're saying about how much you hate your life, but I secretly know you're enjoying it. So we're just going to keep going with it. With the shadow integration, and this is just one small part of it, but just it's a useful thing, and it's a very head-wrecking kind of way of thinking about things. Is to kind of go, yeah, there's a part of me that is enjoying this the way people enjoy scary movies. And if I deny that, I push it away, so nothing changes. Whereas when I acknowledge it, then there's a chance that it'll change. So, shadow integration. Make friends with your shadow. You'll thank yourself for doing it.
And the last one says, when you can't look on the bright side, I will sit with you in the dark.
That's all we want, really, isn't it? But it's so hard to do when somebody that we love is hurting. But when we are hurting, that is all we want. We don't want someone to come in and turn the light on. We don't want someone to rescue us. We don't want someone to take the pain away. It'd be nice, but it's not really what we want. We just want company. Like, I've worked with lots of people, thousands at this stage, and I'd say majority of the effectiveness that I have is that I'm not trying to fix them, and that I'm not trying to take their pain away. Now, that's not to say that I wouldn't like for their pain to be less or to diminish. That'd be lovely. But I know that the real power in what I do is in just being with them, just being a friendly companion as we walk along together. Because it can be a hard road. We all go through periods of being a hard road. And just to have a bit of company on those difficult stretches it can be all we need. And if you can just wait for the person to ask you for help, which is often you kind of think a person is crying, they're upset, and you kind of feel like, isn't that a question? Aren't they saying, I want this to stop? And often they're not. Often tears just have to come out. I'm not saying you encourage it or you're like, oh, have a good cry, or if you're not having a catharsis, you're not really having anything. I don't mean that at all. But if they're coming, just the fact that they're coming doesn't mean that you have to try and get them to stop. Because often when people moved to try and get people out of pain, it feels like it's selfless, but often it's not. Because often what is happening is the person, their pain is reflecting a pain in us, and we don't like it. I used to see this a lot working with babies, particularly babies who had birth trauma. And sometimes in the process of releasing that, the babies cry, and the crying, it almost goes into another dimension. It's the sort of crying that makes the hair stand up on the back of your head. And it's very, very difficult to listen to and to hold. And hold in the space for the baby that, like, if that's what you need to do, then I'm here and it's okay, and let it out kind of thing. But what's very interesting is how disturbing it is for the parents, because often the parents, like most of us, would have unresolved birth trauma. And as the baby's crying started to build, and it got into that zone of really resonating with a deeply suppressed cry inside the parents become very, very disturbed. And, it was often all I could do to hold everybody in the room long enough that the baby could get it out. And the hilarious thing is, the baby would cry, and then once it was out, it would almost be like they would stop dead and just settle, and the great harmony would be in their system. And the parents and me were like wiping our foreheads, like, oh my God, And I used to really feel for the parents, because at least the baby doesn't have all that adult sophistication of covering and like, oh, you're not supposed to cry. It's like your baby. If you cry, it's fine, But as adults, it has to be very controlled kind of environment to get back to that point to release birth trauma. And I've helped people I think in their 80s was the oldest person that I worked with who released their birth trauma, which is so sad, because it means that they carried that their whole life. They carried this trauma until they were 80, and then they released it. It's beautiful that they released it, but it's a heavy burden to carry, So this is a lovely thing to remember. If you can't see the light, then I'll sit with you in the dark. Because often, and this is something you kind of have to look into for yourself, is like, am I trying to jolly the person out of where they're at? Because it makes me feel uncomfortable, and I don't like the way it makes me feel. I feel kind of that darkness they're feeling. It reminds me of the darkness that's inside me, and I don't like feeling that. So come on, let's just open the curtains and cheer up for God's sake. It's not that bad, and of course it is that bad, and it's that bad until it's not. And that's the hard thing. The hard thing is to really, when you're sitting with the person in the dark, yeah, you're holding them, but really you're holding yourself. You're holding your own kind of darkness and your own, what it's bringing up and reflecting in you, that you're holding that, and you're not like allowing it to reverberate with the other person and get into this like dark resonance where you're both going deeper and deeper into the abyss. You don't want to do that, but then you also don't want to try and squash it down and deny it, which is you know, very easy to do, and we often do it without meaning to. So this is a lovely thing to remember, that like being willing to sit with somebody in the dark. That's what I was saying about, you know, working with people. A huge amount of healing goes on just from being willing to sit with them, just from being willing to hold the space with them, to not try and make it better. Not that you wouldn't want it to be better for them, of course you would, but to not try and, you know, interfere with their process because it's making you feel uncomfortable. To just hold it, you know. And yeah, it's amazing how powerful and how healing that can be, to just have a friendly bit of companionship as you're going through a very difficult stretch of the road. And if you can think of it like that, that you don't have to do much except be with them. You don't have to do much except just be that bit of, you know, friendly companionship. And think of it in terms of walking along beside them. You don't have to carry them. You don't have, you know, and it would be a little bit like that, you know, you're going through a difficult stretch, and then suddenly someone picks you up and starts carrying you. You know, it's like I didn't want to be carried. I just wanted a bit of companionship. I didn't want to feel so on my own with it. So yeah, I encourage you to remember this one. It's a very good one, and to just sit with people rather than try and fix them, and just see what happens. It's beautiful. All right, well, that's all I have for you this time. I trust you're well. I trust you're of good cheer, and I'll talk to you again soon. Bye.